right, let's go ahead and kick this thing off. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to the Good morning to the Environmental Monitoring and Compliance Division and to our partners who join us today from beyond the division. We welcome you all and thanks for coming. I hope everyone's having a great start to your Friday. Looks like it's going to be a sunny and warm weekend ahead. Today is the second and final delivery for this 9th session in the City of Creeks Learning Series, where we're aiming to create a shared base of knowledge across our new division. And presenting today, we have Jessica Wilson and Stephanie Arnold, both with the City of Austin Watershed Protection Department. Jessica manages our department's outstanding community education program, and Stephanie is a graduate engineer in the division's essential data analytics and decision support team. Together, they'll provide a high-level overview of our department's proactive, programmatic solutions to protect and repair our urban watersheds. Additionally, we'll learn how modeling is being used as an important tool to refine these programs and make recommendations on where these solutions are most needed. Throughout the presentation, I encourage attendees to use the chat feature and submit questions and comments. We'll aim to circle back to those following the presentation. So from here, I'll turn it over to our speakers to take it away.
Thanks for having us as part of this series, Brian. So as we began the City of Creeks presentation series, a big part of this was to look at the Environmental Monitoring and Compliance Division and how that is a part of our overall department. And if we think about our department as a healthcare system, and then the EMC division is the doctors of that. And then other pieces of the department have other medical roles. So today we're going to be diving into, in that analogy, preventative and predictive care for watersheds health. My team focuses on community education, and we have 3 core groups that are part of that. We work towards these goals with marketing and technology, youth education, as well as community programs. And if you think about that analogy again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And when we have some parts of our community that need some more intensive care, we're not the engineers that are going to come in and do big surgery. We're the physical therapy to hopefully avoid that surgery, or if we have needed to go in and do something that is much more just a larger intervention, then we can help with the recovery from it. And then we are dovetailing with our data analysis decision support team because they are really a crucial part of our conversation as we analyze the effectiveness of these interventions that we're trying. We refine what we're doing. We target how we can be most effective and where. And so Stephanie will be illustrating this through looking at our Raincatcher pilot program as a case study. At the beginning of this series, Mateo Scoggins kicked it off talking about Environmental Monitoring and Compliance Division as the watershed doctors with this graphic. And so if we think of the different parts of EMC as part of medical system, we think about groups like water quality compliance as that acute care. They are our EMTs, first responders on the scene when there has been a disaster. Pond inspection, dam safety, we have already put an intervention into place, and they are making sure that everything is on track. Has everything that we've put into place going? Are we going to need to go back in and do some more work there? And then when we think about hardshed research, these are our variety of scientists who have a variety of expertises. And so they are looking at the overall health of our system. What are the best practices? What interventions are needed? Is that something that is preventative? Is that something that is a larger intervention? How are those interventions actually working? And then we move into other groups. So you could put a variety when it says EMC plus. So you can insert a variety of different parts of our department there. For today, it's preventative care, where we're going to be talking with my team and Stephanie to talk about, well, how do we avoid problems in the first place? And it's much easier to avoid that pet waste going into the creek than to try and reduce bacteria loads once it's already heavy. So how do we stop problems before they start? If we already have unhealthy habits, how do we change them? How do we bolster and support the healthy habits that we have and reinforce those throughout our community? alongside this prevention being the best medicine, what we're going to dive into is how we move on this spectrum from awareness to action and how we build trust. Something that we use not only in marketing, but really it's a core of all of the programs that we do, is it's incredibly rare that somebody jumps from awareness to action on any issue. You start off by building awareness of something that's happening. So if you were talking in the medical analogy about things, you need to know the symptoms of a stroke. That would be your broad awareness. And then you develop an interest in it, a desire to learn more. Your actions might be things that you could do to reduce that stroke, or if you're in that space of emergency, to address it. So we use this awareness, interest, desire into action as we're ultimately working to build that within our community so we can all work together. And one of the unseen outcomes of this is trust. As we are clearly communicating with the community, as we are here with proactive and preventative solutions, as we're involving people in that solution process and listening to them and welcoming people in as volunteers and ambassadors, that builds relationships and that builds trust. In our marketing and technology section, people receive information in a lot of ways. And so we have to deliver that through a variety of devices, and it's constantly changing. So we have to stay on top of research and innovation. It used to be that if you wanted somebody to know about an event, you could just put it in the community newspaper. And that's not the case anymore. Different people receive information in different ways, and we all get a lot of information. So what we get out there needs to come from different avenues. It needs to be digestible, relatable, and exciting. So our talented team does this through a wide variety of things, and we still hold on to things like hard copy newsletters, but then we also add in digital newsletters, social media, virtual reality, signage. So when you are receiving these messages about our programs, that it is throughout the community and it becomes a part of the common base of knowledge that Austin shares. In youth education, we work elementary school all the way through young adults. And so in the elementary school level, we have some programs that are led by Watershed staff, our Earth Camp and Earth School programs. And through that, we offer those programs to all of the schools that are in AISD, but we also work with other ISDs that have campuses in the Austin jurisdiction. So for example, we offer Earth School to Del Valley and Eanes ISD, Del Valley for having them in the area, Eanes ISD because of being a part of a critical environmental feature area. We also work with community collaborations. We have wonderful partnerships with organizations like Keep Austin Beautiful for the Clean Creek Campus program, Partners for Education, Agriculture, and Sustainability, where we work with green stormwater infrastructure. And nothing puts a smile on my face like seeing kindergartners out there digging out a stormwater inlet and knowing how rainwater flows across their campus and that there's a creek on the edge of campus. We have teaching gardens at the Becker Green Classroom as well as St. David's Community Foundation, where we use those for our programs, but those are also then community spaces that other people could come into to learn about the work that we do. Middle school, we have our Watershed Detectives program, which also includes a flood curriculum. So in addition to learning about all of the water quality, people are learning flood safety awareness. And we have collaborations like the Austin Energy Science Festival, where we give out a Watershed Detective Award to a student who has a project related to the work that we do and then arrange a shadowing opportunity for them. When we do field days for middle school, it involves lots of other organizations and city departments. And then we also work with a program called Cave Sim, recognizing that we can't take every student out to caves. There's a limited amount of cave access, but there's a cave simulator that we can take out to schools to help them teach about surface to groundwater connections and how that relates to our groundwater. In high school, we have our hydrophiles program that our staff leads. And then collaborations, again, we work with Austin Energy Science Fest, and that one has a hydrophile award. We have a long-standing relationship with Austin Youth River Watch, as well as a fantastic emerging program at Aikens High School with the Park Ranger Cadets, where we support financially as well as with some institutional and information sharing with a peer mentor, interns, and apprentices. And we also work with Barton Springs University as an example of an event that we attend regularly. And then we have things that support all of our grade levels. So we have an interdepartmental youth education team with people throughout the department in different fields who really believe in working with children and how that connects to our mission. So they help us with things like taping events, science festivals, and it's so valuable for our students to get to meet somebody who knows how to operate heavy equipment or who's an engineer. And it really opens up not only people's eyes to our mission, but to career pathways that I know I never knew existed when I was in school. And then we also have collaborations like Bright Green Future Grants, which has a focus on green stormwater infrastructure, and Cities Connecting Children to Nature collaborative. In community programs, I break this into two areas as I think about it. I think about preventative health care for some set of programs, and then I think about physical therapy for some others. And this picture's of Victor, who is one of our Park Ranger Cadets interns, who then became our first apprentice focusing on green stormwater infrastructure. And so we also work on how do we have overlap between marketing and technology, youth education, how do we grow that into community programs? So he's now a young adult who is out there sharing information about GSI. So in preventative healthcare, we have programs like Scoop the Poop, Leave No Trace, and Storm Drain Marking, where we are building awareness at that top level and really moving people into some actions. So for Scoop the Poop, we want people to pick up that pet waste so it doesn't flow into the creek. Storm Drain Marking, actions are people, awareness comes from people just seeing the marker in place. The action is not only people placing the marker as part of a volunteer opportunity, but also the action of developing a deeper understanding about our infrastructure and unseen network and that surface to creek connection. When we look at programs like Grow Green, which is earthwise gardening, we work with about a dozen city departments as well as groups like Master Gardeners to share the message. And our staff focuses in primarily on things like integrated pest management, as well as the reduction of fertilizers so we can reduce pesticides and fertilizers going on our ground, which ultimately gets into the water. And we also focus heavily on rain gardens and cisterns to get that water to soak in where it falls and really be treated as a resource. And then when we think about physical therapy, we are working with multiple people throughout our organization as well as nonprofits, sometimes in a supporting role, sometimes in a lead role, but they're really a crucial part of community programming and how we maintain and build that relationship with community members. So these are things that happen when the area is already degraded and needs some extra help. So if it's a creek that's has a lot of erosion and we really want to keep that soil in place, we want to slow the water down before it reaches the area, we'll work on things like grow zones and the Ready Set Plant program to get community members to help plant seedlings along there. And not only do we get seedlings in the ground, but they understand what the creek is, the function of those plants, feel a sense of ownership, and hopefully go back to their communities and do that too. Similar with Adopt a Creek, Clean Lady Bird Lake, it's getting volunteers out on the lake. And so, yes, they're picking up trash, but they're also learning about our amazing staff that are out there full time helping to keep the lake clean. How many creeks come to the lake that trash could have come all the way from way up in North Austin and flowed down to the lake? They're helping us with that physical therapy rehabilitation of the site and growing their knowledge. Adopt a Storm Drain, we're doing maintenance to ensure that infrastructure functions the way that it was intended. And then with the Raincatcher pilot program, we're working to restore urban hydrology in an area that did not have any more opportunities for our department to come in and do those bigger interventions. So the only place that was left, or the most logical place that was left, is on private property. And so this is a voluntary program where we work to reduce barriers and encourage community members to install rain gardens and cisterns to help us heal that area as much as possible. But what do we know? Our tracking sheet has more than 100 rows in it. We track a lot of stuff. Pet waste bags used per year in park, we know that we're close to 3 million on that. And that last fiscal year, we diverted approximately 1.4 million pounds of pet waste from waterways. We track video views. We know that our Grow Green tree mulching video has more than 10,000. We know we get more views on Facebook than on YouTube, but people watch more of the video on YouTube. And we know that our social media followers really like nature videos. We know we reach a lot of kids. We typically reach more than 10,000 each year, and that's not including numbers from some of our collaborations. We track our web pages in terms of performance and how we improve them and what's getting the most hits. So we know that our homepage gets about 17,000 and our Grow Green page gets about 150,000. We track number of things that we're giving out. So we know that we typically give out 40 to 60,000 of our Grow Green native and adapted plant guides per year. We know that we mark about 1,500 storm drains per year. And by we, I mean the community and our volunteers. But there's so much more that we want to know. And this is where the data analysis decision support team really is key to how we refine and target and improve our programs. So while we have all of these data points, we want to know more about how many people are moving on that spectrum from awareness to action. What is most effective in that? Where are people getting caught up? In which of our programs? Are our outreach efforts and the results equitable? And so much more. That's why I'm thrilled that Stephanie will walk us through some of the exciting work that her team is doing in things like structural equation modeling, because it is so fantastic to have these connections in-house to be able to move us into a realm where not only does our department feel very comfortable in environmental models and using that in our decision making, but now also looking at things like agent-based modeling and structural equation modeling that can help us understand how we support our community, meaning the people in it.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. So yeah, now I'm going to talk to you guys about the Raincatcher pilot program as an example of how we can use statistical modeling to answer some of the questions that Jessica just mentioned, such as how are we moving people from awareness to action, and what's the most effective way to move people in that direction. Like Jessica mentioned earlier, the goal of the Raincatcher pilot program is to heal urban hydrology through decentralized GSI by providing assistance and incentives to people in the headwaters of Waller Creek to install rain gardens and cisterns on their private property. Previous hydrologic modeling studies done by the city have shown that utilizing these residential yards can have the potential to reduce erosion and increase base flow in Waller Creek. And the objective for the research project on the program is to test different behavioral interventions and see how we can increase in the program and move people from awareness to action. The research project studying the RCPP started in 2018 and has gone through multiple phases of information gathering, like interviews and surveys. And then we've used that information to test different social and behavioral nudges where we're trying to nudge people towards taking action. And so those nudges have mostly been making adjustments to the messaging and informational mailouts about the program that gets sent to residents in Waller Creek in each of these phases. And we're just focusing the messaging on certain behaviors in order to encourage people to participate. And I'll explain a more detailed example of how we've sort of used modeling to figure out how to phrase some of these nudges in a little bit. And so we've used structural equation modeling to analyze the survey responses from some of the phases to inform future phases of the research study. I'm going to talk a little bit about structural equation modeling in general and how we built our model. And I'm going to try to keep it pretty broad and overhead view, not try to get too into the math behind it. So structural equation modeling is a way to analyze the structural relationships between variables. And so SEMs are commonly used for social sciences and studying behavioral data because SEMs are characterized by modeling and measuring variables that aren't necessarily quantifiable on their own and are usually unobservable. So for example, thinking of behavioral data, a variable like awareness, so like a person's awareness of an issue, isn't really something that you can directly measure and just ask them what their awareness is and get like a good measurement. But you can ask a variety of questions through a survey with quantifiable answers to estimate and summarize that variable of awareness. And so this aspect of SEMs makes it really useful for studying behavioral data. Another thing about SEMs that's useful for behavioral data is that it's considered a dimension reduction method. So high dimensional data basically means it's data where you have a really high number of variables, but a small number of data points. So sometimes you might even have more variables than you do observations. So SEMs work really well to reduce that high dimensionality of data, which is usually what you have when you're working with behavioral survey data, because you might have a ton of survey questions that you're asking, but significantly less responses than you have questions. And then another useful part of SEMs is that they allow, or I guess the one that we specifically used, allows for comparison between different demographic groups so that we can see how different relationships between different behavioral variables can change based on different demographic groups. This is a simplified version of what our structural equation model looks like. It essentially looks like a web diagram that's showing all the relationships between different behavioral components and how they influence each other. It kind of works like a flow chart reading from left to right, where people move through these different behavioral thought processes in order to get to their intention to participate and take action in the program. So we built this model based on a combination of other pro-environmental behavior SEMs that use a combination of all of these behavioral variables. And we thought that these sort of fit the best way to describe the decision-making process for participation in the program. And so in the diagram, each line connecting different variables represents a linear relationship between the two. And we use that linear relationship to measure the sort of the connection between the variables and also create like a measurement for the variable itself. I'm not going to explain each of these behavioral concepts because a lot of them are self-explanatory, but I'm going to talk about a couple of them that aren't so obvious. PBC stands for perceived behavioral control. And it's kind of what it sounds like. It's just how you perceive your control over a situation. So in this scenario, an example of perceived behavioral control could be, do you think you will be able to keep up with the maintenance of a rain garden on your property? Or maybe like an economic or financial example, do you think that you'll be able to afford the upfront costs of installing a rain garden on your property? Another one that doesn't inherently make sense is internal attribution, which is basically like the way you perceive your personal responsibility for something. Do you feel like you are personally responsible for doing everything that you can to help with creek health in your neighborhood? It's an example of internal attribution. So each bubble in this diagram represents a behavioral concept, and then we use the model to try to measure their overall impact on a person's decision-making process pertaining to participation in the program. Each bubble is quantified by using responses to those quantifiable survey questions. So for example, for like problem awareness, examples of questions that we can use to measure this variable could be, on a scale of 1 to 5, do you agree that the health of creeks in Austin is an important issue? Or a scale of 1 to 5, do you agree that rainwater that runs off houses is a threat to the health of creeks? So by using that Likert scale of 1 to 5, we're giving those questions a quantifiable value. And then we can create a weighted sum of those responses to give a value to these abstract concepts like problem awareness or social norms. And so then once we identify the strength and direction of the relationships between all of these behavioral concepts, we can see which behaviors most heavily influence a person's decision to participate in the program. And then we can use that information to guide further nudges to increase people's participation. So for the results of the survey analysis that we got through this structural equation modeling, I'm going to go over two pretty general plots that gave us some useful information that we use to proceed with future phases and nudges in the study. This group of graphs shows the scores for each of the behavioral variables that were output from the model. So the way to read this is essentially if we were able to have a way to directly ask each participant like one all-encompassing question that completely sums up one of these behaviors, and they gave us a response on a scale of 1 to 5. So this is just sort of the weighted sum of all the survey questions related to these behaviors. So looking at these plots, we can see for things like problem awareness, most people are pretty aware of the issues of the health of Waller Creek. You know, it skews to the right, high scores for problem awareness. But then for things like attitude, it's a little more spread out. So even though people are aware of the problems, people's attitudes towards it kind of vary. And then for things like moral norms, which are, you know, people's feelings of moral obligation, like approval of neighbors or friends or family, those are fairly low. So that's not, you know, showing a high impact on people's intention to participate, moral norms. The other graph that we looked at when analyzing these results is the plot of the total effects of each of the behavioral concepts on a person's intention to participate in the program. So in this, it's showing the total effects. So we have indirect and direct effects. Indirect basically means any relationship to intention that's not directly outlined in the model. So for example, problem awareness and intention are related indirectly through other variables, but they don't directly have a relationship in the model. And then a direct relationship is where they're, you know, directly connected. So that's what those mean. Looking at this plot, we were able to identify which variables had the strongest effect on intention to participate. So for example, PBC, perceived behavioral control, had a substantial effect on intention to participate. So we identified PBC, especially economic incentives, as a good option for the focus of messaging and future mailouts in order to nudge people towards participating. An example of how we did that is we decided to test out including an option where a free street tree is included with cisterns to reduce costs. And so then we'll see how that influences whether or not people decide to participate in the program. One of the main limitations of the model is that the model works best when the data collecting phase is designed with the model in mind. So basically, when you're creating a survey that you want to analyze with this type of SEM, you need to have the structure of the model built first, so that you can use those behavioral concepts, variables, and their relationships as a guideline for what questions you want to ask, because essentially the model acts as your hypothesis because you're hypothesizing all of those relationships. And so for this study, the survey had already been created and sent out before we selected this model for analysis. So we're hoping to implement one last survey in one of the final phases of the study. And if we can, then this survey will be structured more around the model, and it'll allow us to hopefully improve the results of the model. There's also a larger scale study being conducted with UT and the urban design group, Asakura Robinson, and they're investigating really similar behavioral interventions, but at a citywide. And they're also working with agent-based SEMs, similar to what we have used. So we're hopeful that the results of that study can maybe provide some useful information that we can apply back to the RCPP as well. So that is all I have. Thank you guys for attending, and I will pass it back off to Ryan in case we have any questions.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Jessica, for the tour of our department's education programs. You know, all of those touch points that we're using to connect and collaborate with the community are always so inspiring to see. And Stephanie, getting a glimpse of the science behind these models is really fascinating, and using the Raincatcher pilot program is just an excellent case study and model. I'm so glad to have you share this work happening in our department. It's really insightful. I see a question or a hand up from Nate Bendick. Go ahead, Nate.
My question is, I guess, for Stephanie and somewhat for Jessica, but I'm interested in knowing about the sample you used and how confident you are the sample reflects your population. And specifically, I can imagine when thinking about rain gardens, you're more likely to engage people that are aware of the problem. And so that could affect the results of your analysis. So I'd like some reflection on that. Thanks.
I do know that in at least the phase of the study where we sent out the survey that we used for this model, we did include some sort of incentives for people to participate in responding to the survey to hopefully overcome that like bias among people. I can't remember exactly what the incentive was. Jessica, do you remember?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit more about that because I know some of that began prior to Stephanie coming on board, and it was done through some pro bono work that the Nature Conservancy did with us. So the Nature Conservancy conducted a survey and reached out, directly with not just one, but multiple mail outs to conduct a survey with this targeted geographic area that we are working in. And they very closely tracked, okay, if we got a survey response from this address, they did not get the next mail out. So, but people who were not responding continued to get more, and they actually included cash in the envelope as because that's been a proven way to motivate people to take the survey, because we are definitely interested in what early adopters what they're thinking, what the motivations are, but we're interested in everybody in the community and how we listen to them and remove barriers. So, it was, it had a wonderful response rate. I forget the exact percentage, but it was much higher than you see in typical surveys, and definitely had people who were not participating in the program currently. So we could apply that knowledge to the models as well as adjust our program in real time.
I just want to add that I think what Nate was worrying about was that we were only talking to people who had rain gardens or who were already, like you said, first adopters. But I don't know if it was super clear there, Nate, but we targeted the entire geographic area.
No, I get that. I wasn't worried that you did just that, just more curious about what was the sample size and, the response rate and that sort of thing. And do the people that responded match, a random sample of the people in the area, that kind of thing?
Yeah, those are great questions. And so, we really did see a variety of people on the spectrum of involvement and awareness responding to it. I do think that cash incentive from the Nature Conservancy helped with that, as well as the repeat mail outs to people if they were not engaging. And then the Nature Conservancy also went and had conversations with community members. So while there was the survey, there was also some more in-depth follow-up, and that was very specifically not just with people who had rain gardens. So it was looking at people who had not responded to wanting them yet.
That cash incentive is so interesting. I've never heard anything like that before. So that was for folks who had recipients who had not even responded yet, but that was upfront cash in an envelope. Kevin Autry had a comment that he loves the overview of all of our department's outreach. He's also been watching the content on our YouTube channel, and these are great resources. He loves the old dandelion from the Grow Green campaign a couple of years ago. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, just a fun note. Dandelion's actually more than 10 years old at this point, even
Wow.
now a familiar animated face in our encouragement of people to, welcome a few weeds into the yard. The benefits of having Mr. Dandelion over there versus having chemicals on your yard. There are trade-offs there. So we like our dandelion one. We're currently working on a new Grow Green ad campaign, which involves some little crocheted figures and animations through it. So stay tuned for a new set of characters.
Lauren Parrish says she didn't know that we had an Adopt a Storm Drain program. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that one works?
Absolutely. And this is one that we will be launching very soon. So it's been developed. We've briefed executives and other groups who work really directly on designing and maintaining our stormwater pipes and the inlets, but it has not been rolled out to the community yet. So that's why you aren't aware of the program as much. The coordinator for that program, Liz Heron, is actually on her honeymoon. And so we decided to wait until she got back because we didn't know what the level of community response would be to it. But basically, we have so many thousands of storm drain inlets throughout the city. And while our staff gets to a lot of those, we know that we have many that get clogged with sediment and vegetation, have a lot of leaves and trash flowing into them, which can clog the pipes and put that stuff directly in our creeks in a way that is not what would happen in a normal, less disturbed system. And so the Adopt a Storm Drain program encourages people to adopt storm drains that are near where they live, where they work, where they just spend a lot of time. And there are two ways that people can participate. So if it is a busier street and they notice that an inlet needs some care, maybe it's blocked, it's had sediment pile up, and now there are little seedlings, like tree seedlings growing out of it, which we do see, and then can lead to localized flooding issues and street flooding, then they can call that into 311 and our crews know to go and maintain that one, because we don't have eyes everywhere. And so the more community members we have to help us with that, the better. And then the other way that they can get involved, if it's a street that is not as busy, so we don't have a safety hazard of them working in the area, then they can sweep along the curb, put those leaves or grass clippings into the compost or spread them on their yard. They can pick up the trash, put that in their trash can. And if there's sediment that's accumulated, they can scoop that with a shovel and put that on their yard as well. So it's a way to reduce some of these localized street flooding issues that we can see, raise awareness about these thousands of miles of pipes that we have underground. And then also, I hope develop some empathy and appreciation and respect for the hard work that our staff do to maintain these and create these systems.
Well, what an amazing idea for a new program. I know I'm imagining Lauren and her teammates and the spill response program, their eyes are probably just lighting up thinking about this. So that's a really good one. Thank you.
One last thing that I would like to share that I was thinking about last night is a piece that I'm really proud of in this collaboration is I think often in our world, we have concepts like agent-based structural equation modeling that stays in an academic realm. And they might use examples like things that happen in cities as a study to look at, to run the models and do papers and presentations about it. I think it's much more rare to have academics and practitioners working directly on it. What is the actual data? How do we improve the data that we're collecting? At what point do we need to engage? How do we analyze it? What is actually practical to implement? If we're studying something that we may not be able to actually do, or there are going to be too many barriers in terms of staffing or resources, is that where we need to investigate? And so it's just a amazing cross-discipline connection. And I think and hope that it's going to have benefits not just for our city, but for other cities who do the type of work that we do.
Thanks so much for sharing that observation, Jessica. That's really a great insight, a good thing to be pointing out. I think that represents the future direction that we're trying to move in as a department. We've had success there before, but even greater forecasts in the future. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great point. Okay, well, it looks like we can wrap it up here. We have lots of compliments coming through in the chats. Thank you all. Thank you to our speakers, Jessica and Stephanie, for presenting today. And thank you all for coming. It's been a great discussion, and I hope everybody has a great weekend ahead. Thanks, everyone.